Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Jill Stoddard and I'll be the moderator for our roundtable today. And I'd like to start us off by telling you a little story, a personal story. And this was when I was a master's student in San Diego and I was applying to doctoral programs. And at that time, a mentor encouraged me to apply to work with Dr. David Barlow at Boston University for my Ph.D. Now, Boston is where I grew up, and at that time, I really didn't want to go back home. But long story short, a series of events made me really feel compelled to apply to the program. But I kept this a secret from my family because I didn't want to feel any pressure from them to come back home. And then I also happened to look at it was a catalog at the time, it was so long ago, it was a paper catalog, at all of the requirements and just like knew for sure there was no way I was getting into this program anyway. But I applied, kept it from my parents, and then eventually the guilt of keeping this a secret really got to me. So I confessed to my dad, I told him the whole story. And his response was, Dave Barlow, the psychologist? Now, my dad is a business guy. I have no idea how he knew him, but he said, oh, I play golf with that guy. And this was quite a surprise. I didn't know he knew anyone in the mental health community. So anyway, the next time my dad went and played golf with Dave Barlow, he happened to mention that I was applying to his program, and Dave said, oh, have her send her materials to me, which I did. So fast forward a few months, and I was accepted to the program, my dream program, as it turns out. And that was over 20 years ago. And to this day, I still worry. And part of me really thinks that the only reason I got in was because of my dad. That I didn't deserve it, that I didn't really belong there. And that someday, maybe that day is today, because here I am telling you the story, everyone would find out that I'm a fraud. And so I'm willing to bet that each of you probably has a similar story, a similar feeling, which is why you would come to a roundtable. So today's roundtable is From Fraud to Fierce, How ACT helped us overcome imposter syndrome and can help you too. So welcome to our fellow imposters. Now, this is a story I still really struggle to share because I feel like I am outing myself with this, dirty little secret. And now all of you know the truth that I didn't really deserve that success. And so you may wonder, why on earth would I share that secret if it makes me so uncomfortable? And the reason is because authenticity and vulnerability are two of my most deeply held personal values. And I would rather you know the whole real me and maybe judge me than know a half-true version of me. And I also value courage and going for it, going after what's important to me, even if it means I might fail or be rejected or be judged in some way. And so this is why back in 2012, I pitched New Harbinger Publications a book idea, even though my mind was certain I had no business writing a book. I'm not a writer, I'm not an expert enough in ACT, and that book was the big book of ACT metaphors. And since that time, really living the principles of ACT by staying clear about these values and bringing all the anxiety and self-doubt and imposterism along for the ride has led to some incredible opportunities. So opportunities like becoming a peer-reviewed ACT trainer, even though I didn't think I was expert enough to do it. Writing my second book, Be Mighty, even though I didn't and still struggle to think of myself as a real writer. Becoming a co-host of my favorite podcast, Psychologists Off the Clock, even though I really wasn't sure I would add any value. Running for the board of the Association of Contextual and Behavioral Sciences, even though I was sure no one knew who I was and wouldn't vote for me. And then finally recently doing a TEDx talk, even though I knew my idea wasn't really an idea worth sharing. So I would like for each of you to think about the places where maybe you feel like a fraud, and the ways in which those thoughts and your self-doubt might be holding you back from going after your dreams, your aspirations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the imposter syndrome phenomena, and then I'll introduce each of our panelists who will share some of their personal stories and words of act wisdom. And our hope is that our discussion today will spur you to go for it in some of these domains too. So as we're talking, feel free to type questions or comments in the chat box or wait until the end, and then when the discussion part is over, we'll have about 15 minutes for discussion and Q&A. So imposter syndrome was first described by psychologists Dr. Suzanne Imes and Pauline Clance in the 1970s, and refers to a pattern of behavior where people doubt their abilities and have a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. It's estimated to affect about 70% of people at some point in their lives, and maybe 100% of people at academic conferences, I don't know. And it typically occurs among high achievers who have a hard time internalizing and accepting their success. They often attribute their accomplishments to luck or someone being nice to them or giving them a chance rather than to their ability. Imposter syndrome was initially believed to be unique to women, and that is no longer the case, but it is definitely more common in women and minorities. One study found that imposter feelings add substantially to the stress minorities already feel, and another found that among marginalized people, imposter syndrome more strongly predicted mental health problems than did stress related to one's minority status alone. Now, being different from peers in any way can certainly fuel it. So, for example, if you're younger or older compared to your work or school cohort, that kind of thing. But it can be especially present for those who have received cultural messages that they have to overcompensate to keep up with the majority. So majority being white, cis, straight, able-bodied men. So for example, Black men and women are often told they need to do twice as well as their white counterparts to be included, accepted, or taken seriously. And this isn't just a belief system. This is a cultural and systemic reality. As Black journalist Jolie Doggett put it, quote, "For people of color, imposter syndrome isn't just an imaginary voice in our heads. We receive almost daily messages from society that we don't truly belong," end quote. In today's panel, we have mixed genders, races, nationalities, sexual orientations, and abilities. I am a white, educated, middle-class, straight, able-bodied, cisgendered woman. So while I definitely experience imposter syndrome, it's likely that my privilege has made it easier for me to overcome it in terms of my willingness to take risks. And while women certainly fight an uphill battle in a patriarchal world, I don't suffer the double or even triple consequences of those who belong to more than one marginalized group. So privilege is important to keep in mind, and we'll hear today from our panelists who have had the experience of imposter syndrome and belonging to various marginalized groups. Now, according to Doggett, one solution is showing up. That the more women and minorities we have in the room, the more we'll feel like we belong there, and the less alone we'll feel in our minds. Dr. Valerie Young is an expert on imposter syndrome, and she's the author of the book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. She has identified 5 subtypes of imposter. The first is the perfectionist, and this might be somewhat self-explanatory, but the perfectionist sets excessively high goals and standards for him or herself, themselves. And when they fail to reach them, they experience major self-doubt and worry about measuring up and believe that any so-called failure is proof that they're a fraud. Superhumans push themselves to work harder and harder to measure up and expect themselves to be able to do all the things, all the time, all at once, seamlessly, and without struggle. So when they ultimately become overwhelmed, to them, this is proof that they're a fraud. Natural geniuses believe they need to be a natural genius. So they judge their competence based on the ease, speed, and natural ability that things come to them as opposed to their efforts. So in other words, if they take a long time to master something, they feel shame, and this of course proves their fraudulence. The soloist feels as though asking for help reveals their phoniness, and for them, success really only counts if they've achieved it alone. And then finally, the expert, this is me, the expert measures their competence based on what and how much they know, so knowledge, expertise, etc. And they believe they can never quite know enough and fear being exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. So these are often the folks that have lots of degrees. So there is some good news here. Imposter syndrome correlates positively with success. So the more you have it, the better you do. Now, and actual imposters don't have imposter syndrome. So if you have it, you're likely not actually an imposter. And you may be familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, which essentially refers to a cognitive bias where people overestimate their competence and then are completely unaware of their overestimation error. So these people definitely don't have imposter syndrome. So here's where we find that 30% of people who don't have it. Now, the bad news is, despite what you may think or what you've been trying to do, imposter syndrome does not go away with achievement. So you might think like, well, once I just reach this next highest level or read this next book or take this next class, then I'm going to have the confidence and the proof that I belong. But, you can look at our entire panel. We have some pretty successful people here today, and they all still have imposter syndrome. And, it turns out the higher you go, the more expert you're expected to be. So the imposter syndrome tends to follow. So what this means to me is we can't wait to feel confident that we belong before we go for what we want. And we can't go for more in the service of chasing that confidence. Instead, we can make space for discomfort, notice our imposter voice without letting it dictate our choices, and do what matters no matter what, knowing that it's precisely because it matters that we care and worry about it. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists who have all gone for it and still feel like imposters too. So our first esteemed panelist is Dr. Janina Scarlett. Dr. Scarlett is a clinical psychologist with 2 PhDs, author of 10 books and contributor to many more, co-host of 3 podcasts, TEDx speaker, recipient of the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award by the United Nations Association, and fittingly is a superhuman imposter. Janina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this, Jill, because a very strong part of me is very grateful for being on this panel, and the other part of me is worried now that I'm maybe not an imposter enough to be here, so maybe it means I belong. I have to say I really miss seeing all of you in person. A big part of it is being able to just give everyone a hug and to recognize how not alone we all are. And perhaps maybe another part of it is being able to get all of the ADA swag, like some really cool pens. So since I was a small child, I always collected pens, kind of like this one. So this one I acquired more recently. But my entire life I was fascinated with pens and writing devices because I've always wanted to be an author. And when I was 6 years old, I wrote my first ever short story. So it was 5 pages. Okay, so clearly it was going to be a New York Times bestseller. And I brought it over to my brother. Now, my brother's 10 years older than me, so he was 16 at the time. And he's like the Fonz, he's like the definition of cool. And so I brought it over to him and I said, hey, look, I wrote the short story. Can you read it? And he read it. And I waited. And I asked. And I said, so what'd you think? And he said, meh. It was kind of amateur. So I went to get the dictionary to look up what the word amateur meant. And then it became the word that defined me. It became that word that told me that I'm not good enough. I am not creative enough. And maybe it means that I will never be a good enough person or a good enough writer. Now, I was born and raised in Ukraine. where rates of anti-Semitism were extremely, extremely high. And I remember bringing homework back with 4s, which are equivalent to United States Bs, where I would get a lower grade for maybe a little cross out where I corrected my work, or for poor handwriting, even though I thought my handwriting looked like other classmates. And finally, tired of me constantly bringing home 4s, my mother went up to the teacher and said, "Can you please tell me what my daughter's doing wrong? She's working so hard, she's doing her homework several times over, and yet even if there are no marks, no comments on her homework, she keeps bringing back 4s instead of 5s. The teacher looked at my mom and said, "You have to understand that the only Jew in class cannot possibly have perfect grades." I remember that moment. I was in 3rd grade at the time. And what that said to me is that I have to work harder. I have to work harder than my non-Jewish classmates, and that no matter what I do, it will never be enough to be perfect. I was 12 when we moved to the United States, and by the age of 12, I'd been exposed to violence, anti-Semitism, severe physical abuse, and sexual abuse at the hands of a family member. And when I tried talking to my mother about it, and I tried talking to her about feeling depressed, she said that I'm not allowed to feel this way because other people have it worse. And so the message that I received is that I'm not broken enough to feel bad, that I'm not allowed to feel bad about myself because maybe other people have it worse than I, and I'm supposed to feel grateful, or I'm supposed to feel guilty for not feeling grateful. I was 17 when I first tried coming out to my mom. Veronica and I had been dating for 2 years at that point, and she was coming over every day. And at one point I told my mother, I said, "What would you think if I told you that Veronica and I were dating?" And my mom looked at me. She paused, and she said, I wouldn't say anything because it's not happening. Because if it did, you wouldn't be a member of this family. But it's not happening, right?" And I said, "Right." And for the longest time, I felt that I'm not LGBT enough to be a part of the community. I am now a pansexual woman in a straight-presenting relationship who often feels like I'm not out enough to be a part of the community. In being told to go back to my country, I constantly felt like I was different. I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. And I thought, through my child and teen years, that I was alone in feeling like I don't quite fit in. But something interesting happened in my teenage years. I saw this movie, and it was a fiction movie, but it really spoke to me. And that movie was The X-Men. So in case you're not familiar with the X-Men, it's a movie about these fictional superheroes, or mutants, if you will, each of which has some kind of a genetic mutation. So they're all a little bit different. But what's really interesting is that it's those differences that made them special. It was because of those differences that a lot of the X-Men were marginalized, yes. But it was also those differences that allowed them to have unique superpowers. Whether it's the ability to perceive other people's emotions through empathy, like Professor Xavier, for example, their ability to control the weather, or their ability to heal. And something clicked for me as I was watching this movie. I looked around this completely sold-out movie theater, and I saw that every single person in the movie theater was completely captivated. Everyone was in tears. And at this moment, a realization, and I said to myself, wait a minute, you're not alone. I realized that every person in that theater knew what it was like to feel different, to feel like an outsider, to feel like we don't quite fit in. And it was maybe in that uniqueness, in that aloneness, that we're all together, because that's not what divides us. Feeling different is not an outlier, that's the normalcy. So maybe all those people who say, why can't you just be normal? Maybe they're the ones who are the outliers. Because the truth is, I think majority of the population knows what it's like to feel alone, knows what it's like to feel different, and knows what it's like to desperately want to fit in and to belong. And so it was after seeing that movie that I went into the field of psychology, first taking a class in my high school and then continuing thereafter. And through a good portion of my life, I worked so hard to impress my family and my inner critic, that imposterism. And it didn't matter how many degrees, how many awards, how many talks I had done, because it was never enough. I remember when I received my Human Rights Award from the United Nations Association, I brought this up to my parents, and they said, right, but what does it mean? Are you going to get some kind of financial award? And I was stumped, because for the first time it hit me that my parents will never be able to understand what means something to me, and I will never be able to understand what means something to them. And it was the first time that I was able to recognize that maybe it's not about impressing someone else, or maybe it's not about impressing that inner critic. Maybe it's about following our inner core values, following our own North Star. And maybe it's about doing things that are really meaningful, even if they're terrifying, even if we have 110 panic attacks while doing it. Because the truth is, my imposter syndrome, my entire life, was trying to protect me from further injury, from other people, but mostly from myself. And what I was able to recognize later on is that most of us feel like we're imposters because we care. We care so damn much that we put ourselves through hell because we're trying to belong. And so if you feel like an imposter, if you're ever questioning whether you're ready, whether you're good enough, what it means is that you're exactly what you're meant to be. Because deep within your imposterism are your superpowers, your ambition, your drive, and your community. Now, I still feel like an imposter, but talking about it, presenting on it, normalizing it, allowed me to see that it does get easier, although it never really goes away. So, I'd like to introduce myself today. Hi, my name is Janina Scarlett. I'm a trauma survivor. I'm a pansexual woman. I'm a geek. I'm an author. I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I am an imposter. Thank you.
Thank you, Janina. That was amazing. I just got goosebumps when you did that introduction. I might have to steal that. I mean, with my own information, of course. That would make me an actual imposter if I presented myself as you. I've heard Janina's story many times, and I could hear it a million more, and it never ceases to just inspire and amaze me every time. Thank you. That was wonderful. Next up, we have Dr. Jennifer Payne. Dr. Payne is a multi-award-winning licensed clinical social worker, associate professor, prolific researcher, and the co-coordinator for the executive committee of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Special Interest Group with the Association for Contextual and Behavioral Science. Dr. Payne is also a superhuman imposter.
Absolutely am. And thank you so much, Jill, for allowing me to be a part of this. And just like as we're talking about imposter syndrome, when you asked me to be a part of it, I'm like, who am I? I don't have it enough to be able to be a part of this. But I thank you for asking, and I just loved your story. It really touched me. It's so beautiful. And so I'm just going to kind of tell like my own story. So I grew up in a middle-class home in Los Angeles with two parents. They were both very hard-working parents, and neither of them had a high school diploma because each of them had to leave school for various reasons. Now, back in those days, when you were Black and you were in the days that they were growing up, leaving high school was not necessarily a negative thing. There were times that they had to leave because of different reasons. So, for instance, my mother, she needed to take care of other family members. My father, he left home early and he eventually got drafted to World War II. So neither of them had a high school diploma, but both of them had good, respectable jobs. And so my mother, she was a nursing attendant for over 25 years at Martin Luther King Hospital in our town. And my father was a postal supervisor with the United States Postal Service for over 30 years. And just to give a little bit of background, so I'm the baby of the family. I'm very much the baby. I came along 11 years after one of my sisters, 13 years after the other sister. And so from the beginning, I really felt pressure from my parents to be educated. At that time, and I'm like on the tail end of being a baby boomer, so at that time, education was looked at as the way out for blacks to do better than their parents. And so I actually was a first generation college student. I was the first in my family to finish college before my sisters. And I have a lot of vivid memories of certain interactions with my father. And for me, my father was such a large presence in my life. And when I say large, I mean that he was so big in my eyes. He was so important in my eyes. And I wanted so bad to please him. And I know now that he meant well. I know all that he wanted from me was the best. And I know that he thought that pushing me towards education, that would give me the best. But I do remember a specific memory very vividly of me bringing home a report card to him and of him saying, he looked at the report card, had pretty much all A's on it. There was one B plus. And he said, I see a B plus on here. Why isn't this an A? And this was during a time in junior high that was really so socially tumultuous for me already. During junior high, there were times that I was suicidal. There were a lot of things that were going on socially. And so I always felt that I needed to win my father's love. He really wasn't a man that showed that much emotion. But at the same time, even though I felt like, oh, you know what, I need to press, I need to keep moving to win his love, in the back of my mind, I thought, I'm never going to really attain his love. I have to be perfect in order to attain his love, and then I'll win it. I'll win his love if I'm perfect. And so that mantra of quote unquote I'm not enough began to play a song in my life from junior high on, and actually that song has continued even recently until I just I think a couple of weeks ago I attended an EMDR training, and we practiced on each other, and I realized that wow, that memory is very vivid in my life. And so that song about me not being enough, it continued to play as I obtained various degrees. And I remember when I got a bachelor's in psychology from UCLA, I remember that day that the graduation happened. And both of my parents were at the graduation, but I actually felt really let down on that day. And I was thinking to myself, wow, is this it? After all of this work, 4 or 5 years of just sweating and toiling, this day, this is it. And so really, I've always been hard on myself. When I got my master's degree, I've got a master's degree in social work during a time that really would have been difficult for anybody. So a week after I started the master's program, I learned that I was pregnant with my second child. And this was also during a time where I was married to the love of my life, a man that I loved dearly. However, he unfortunately developed drug issues during our marriage. And so because of that, I endured domestic violence moments. I endured financial struggle moments. I endured having my second child and also having my first child, who was a toddler, throughout my master's program. But yeah, I mean, I not only received my master's on time, but I left with a 3.9 GPA. But I really didn't give myself much credit for my resilience during that time. So then during my Ph.D. program at UCLA, I was caring for my two daughters. They were teenagers by then. And then I was also caring for a disabled family member while I was going to school. And because I was the only one that was bringing money into the house, I clearly remember times when I was working as many as 3 different part-time jobs at the same time while I was working on my dissertation. And I recall sitting in hospital rooms for weeks as my disabled family member got surgery after surgery, all during my dissertation process. And actually, 50% of my cohort of my PhD program dropped out in the first year. Yet, I made it somehow. But yet, my imposter syndrome did not allow me to really take time to celebrate. So basically, it was onward and upward to the next project. And really, that's how my life has been until even now at age 56. Onward and upward to the next project. And so, imposter syndrome is really insidious. I noticed that that it is something that, you know, like puts its tentacles in you, and it's very difficult, like it's very deeply rooted. So one of my fears, one of my main fears is not to necessarily pass away or some other fear like that, but one of my main fears is dropping balls. Because dropping balls, all the balls that I'm juggling, that would confirm my deepest fear, that I'm a fraud. You know, like, I'm just waiting to hear those words. I knew she wasn't all about that. I knew she wasn't all that. And I noticed, and I'm really I'm recovering imposter syndrome person, because I noticed that, you know, I put too many balls in the air. I put I think that I'm some type of juggler. I put them in the air. Even now, I put way too many balls in the air, and yet I know that I have not yet ever dropped the ball. Not yet. Not even during the pandemic. Not even during that horrific 2020. Not even during the time when people are suffering all around me, and not only that, but in addition, there's the social injustice that's taking place in the world. In the midst of all of that, I didn't give myself room to drop the balls. But I still do have, like, that in the back of my mind, that little niggling fear that if I drop some of those balls, and I might drop them in 2021, or I might drop them in 2022. Surely I can't juggle everything forever. Surely I'm going to be found out at some point. And even when I do juggle the balls, I rarely feel good about it. Sometimes I think instead that, like, really, you should be able to manage more. You should feel less stressed when doing it. When I was dealing with a number of things at once, for instance, like I said, I had a disabled family member that really, like, began to depreciate over time, and at the same time, my mother was sick, and she was on the verge of passing away. During that time, like, I think, like, a lot of health related stress issues came up for me, and so I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and there were a number of other things that happened physically. So my body was telling me, you need to drop these balls. What's wrong with you? Why do you keep picking up balls? So that's a constant thing to think about for me, is to make sure I try to keep the playing field level when it comes to how many balls I have. I think also that the complex intersectionality of me being a superhuman imposter, which is what I am, is also influenced by my race. It's also influenced by my cultural upbringing. It's influenced by my spiritual upbringing. And just as Jill mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things culturally that come up that help to push forward the imposter syndrome for me. For instance, I feel like I have taken on and personified the strong Black woman myth. As a Christian that's growing up in a Black church, I have gotten the message over and over that it's godly to give of your time. It's godly to give of your resources. It's not godly to say no. And but I only realized during the past few years that really I don't want the juggler label anymore. I don't want to be the strong one all the time. What I want to do is I want to be free to be me, not based upon my achievements. I just want to be me, just me, like lazy me sometimes, a me that rests, a me that self-forgives, a me that rejuvenates, a me that puts my self-care first. That's really what I'm striving for in 2021. And I'm writing a book now on Black trauma and acts. And in the book, I have a whole section on the myth of the strong Black man and the strong Black woman. And one of the prevalent myths, like I said, of Black culture includes the myth that we are strong, that we can take high levels of abuse, and it affects each gender in different ways. And so often people have used the term resilient to describe us based on the historical trauma that we've suffered, and yet we have been able to keep it moving. But that same myth is believed in our families, and it's perpetuated and it's passed down from mothers' mouths to children. And it's thought that we can endure pain states longer than others for some reason. But really, I personally am sick of the martyrdom that goes along with that, and I'm sick of the self-sacrifice. I'm sick of the unrealistic burdens that go along with it. And I've come to terms with the fact that really I need support too. And I need time to address my own trauma. I need time to come to terms with the systemic disparities that exist as barriers in my life. And I really think it's time for me and for others to let go of some of these false doctrines and to move towards self-acceptance and self-love. And, just as I'm finishing up, I work with a organization called MEND, and MEND is an organization of over 1,000 clinicians of color who want to be trauma trained so that they can provide pro bono services in their community. And I hear the same mantra coming from those clinicians. They're tired. They're tired. And we just don't want to continue to hold up this, again, the martyrdom that goes along with being this strong person. And so I think it's time for us to let go. And hopefully, if this rings true for you, hopefully it's time for you to let go as well. Thank you.
Wow, Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably. You and I don't know each other well, so this is the first time I've heard your story, and I'm just incredibly moved and feeling immense gratitude that you've shared this part of yourself with us. And what really stuck out to me here is, I think you said you're 56. Is that what you said? 56. And how, even now you're clarifying your own values, what you want to be about, what you want to stand for in the world, that this is really an ongoing, lifelong, evolving process, and that we have this sort of like juxtaposition of, I'm talking about my story in terms of like going big as a values-driven path and not letting imposter syndrome get in the way. And you're talking about letting go of some of these balls, giving yourself permission to drop some of these balls, and not letting, I have a bug in my face, not letting that superhuman imposter type keep you striving in a way that's like more avoidant rather than values-driven. And letting go of some of that as a way to live your values. So thank you. That was amazing. All right, moving on to our final panelist, we have Michael Herold, who is the head coach at the Art of Charm, where he is running an online training course for developing confidence, particularly in social settings. He's also a TEDx speaker, and prior to his transition to coaching and speaking, he spent 10 years working in the film industry. And can you guess what type of imposter Michael is? Drum roll. Also a superhuman. So we have quite a theme here. So Michael, let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Like, hearing your stories is so amazing. Like, I'm getting goosebumps, and at the same time, I see my imposter like going completely crazy. So I've been struggling with the imposter syndrome for much longer than I've known the term. And then I heard the term and I was like, oh, that's me. Then, years later, I get invited to talk at the ADA about the imposter syndrome. And my imposter goes like, yeah, but you're not imposter enough, right? You should, like, more. And now, like, I'm hearing your stories, and it's even like, now you see they're going to find out you're not really an imposter. You've heard their stories. So it's like watching a 2-year-old on too much sugar, like running around the room. Like, that's my imposter. But here's my story. My imposter story unfolds over 3 acts, and act number 1 is my 12th birthday. And I'm celebrating this with all of my friends, and it's also the last time that I will celebrate my birthday with all of my friends, because my mom had just gotten remarried, and we were about to move to a new town. So my friends, my family, my cousins, my aunts, uncles, grandparents, all of them would be, in a sort of different life, way too far away for me to reach them with my bicycle. And so I moved to a new town, new environment, and I was the new kid in school. And it freaked me out. It was so scary. I don't know, because I had like stereotypes in my head, or just everything was new. And that was a freaking hard time for me. And I don't know how the bullying started, whether it started because I was the new guy. Maybe it started because I have a disability, and I was walking with this little wobbly walk, and when you pushed me over, it took me a while to get back up again. Maybe it was because my self-confidence was extremely low. Maybe all of that played together, but there came the bullying, and there came 12-year-old Michael realizing you're not good. Everyone's making fun of you. You're not worthy of anything. And of course, this was also the time when puberty hit, like, out of the blue, and suddenly, like, the ladies became really interesting, and everything went like completely bananas. And my solution to the entire drama was I retreated into my shell, and I would be, my shoulders would be up, my head would be low, and that's how I'd go through life. And those were my teenage years. Going to school, happy to go home, sitting in front of the TV, going back to school, and just trying not to show up as a blip on anyone's radar. And my one safe haven was work, or more specifically like school, like really digging in, like giving my best, because during exams, like, no one could hurt me. No one could hurt me when I was raising my hand and I was giving an answer. That's when I was safe. So that's what I did. study like crazy, and I ended up with like the top 0.1 percentile when I graduated in the country. I studied at one of the best universities in Europe, and it was still the same pattern. Like, I'm not good enough. The only thing I have is I can study really hard. But everything else is like, the moment people find out, what's really going on in here, that's when they will like you even less. And after I studied computer science, I went on to go to film school to become a character animator, which has been my dream since I was a kid. Maybe because I spent my teenage years like watching cartoons. Maybe that was the reason. I don't know. And again, there I was really good at what I was doing. I was working on some of the like highest rated TV shows of the time, and also I only felt safe when I was at work. And only when I was at my desk working, not when I was having coffee with my colleagues because my confidence was too low, but when I was at my computer working, that's when I felt like, safe. And looking back, I would say that my life then, I think I was quite moody. I had very strong lows. I was very needy. My worth was defined by what other people were thinking about me. I think I was at times also manipulative because that was my way of like getting attention. And while I was never formally diagnosed, I think there was also a lot of depression in the mix there at times. And so that was my life in the film industry. And now I'm doing this movie cut to a little bit later where I'm living in Vienna, Austria. And I see... So I'm still working in the film industry then, and I see a meetup happening in Vienna, and it's like advertised as, we are going to build our confidence by going outside of our comfort zone and doing these fun little exercises. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is really scary, and let's try it out. Let's try it out. And so I went to this meetup, and this was held by 2 psychology students in their living room. And we were like 15 people, and we talked about, psychological principles. We talked about mindfulness. And then at the end of the event, we went out to a busy street in Vienna where all the shopping happened, where all the tourists were, and we had to do some comfort zone challenges. Now I know those were like exposure exercises, right? But they were called like comfort zone challenges. And the ones that I had picked for myself was I wanted to high-five strangers. I wanted to get rejected by asking people things like, can I eat your ice cream? Can I have your dog? Can we switch pants? Stuff like that. So I would get that rejection. And I would tell them stupid jokes. Except what happened was that I got out of the tram, I saw the people, and I completely froze. Like, I was like, just thinking about this now, like, I feel my hands trembling. Like, this was in November, and I was sweating. I couldn't move. I was like sweat running down and my hand would not come out of the pocket. I was like, I never said I would high five anyone. Like, I'm staying in that pocket, right? And I had one of the coaches next to me, and he would like point at people, right? And then, Michael, this one, and like, and then he would like walk up to people and go like, hey, my friend wants to give you a high five. And like, no, like, don't do this. This is embarrassing. And he wouldn't let go. And he asked me these really weird questions. Like, could you accept what's going on right now? Could you take that with you? What's your mind telling you right now, right? Where are your feet? And I was like, what were the questions? Like, what do you want? But he did manage over half an hour to push me through that, and I high-fived people, and I made so many people laugh, and I told them like stupid jokes, and I was so alive when all of us, we met back up again half an hour later. I had this smile on my face, and I was full of energy, and I felt for the first time in my life, I felt like when I was 12 years old, and I was like, I was there again. I wasn't that shadow, but I was like really there, and I told those guys, those 2 organizers, I said like, I need this. This is exactly what I need in my life right now, and I will show up every Saturday to your meetup because this is what I need. And they looked at me and they said, well, sorry, Michael, like, this is the last time we did this. We're moving away. We're not doing this workshop anymore. And I said, let me take this over. Like, let me run this workshop. I have no idea how. I have no idea. I can do like the intro, right? I can talk a little bit, and I have a living room that can bring in people, and I will wing everything else. I'll make this happen somehow, and that's what we did. So the next week, like me heavily reading up on ACT and exposure and stuff like that, and there I was in front of 20 people going like, these are exposure-based exercises based on ACT, and so I was going through that, right? And I was doing these workshops because I needed them. And I ran these workshops for months, and for every Saturday except Christmas, I had like 20 people in my living room, and I was doing those exercises with them. And then my imposter syndrome came in, because these people were suddenly asking me as if I were an expert. They asked me about confidence, and they asked me about like being in front of 20 people and doing an intro. They asked me like these questions on dating and breakups and relationships and conversation skills and what to do in a networking event. And I didn't know. Like I was just running this thing, right? I didn't know how, but still, like they came and they asked me questions, and even what's more, like a few months into this, like this became quite a movement in Vienna, and we were like in radio, we were in newspaper, we made it to local television, and I got this call from a coaching company, and they said, hey, we heard what you were doing. You did more workshops than we did. Do you want to be a coach for us and do like this online, this several week-long program online? And suddenly I was a coach, and now I was asked these questions, and they paid me to do that, right? Not only was I an imposter, I got money for it. And those people that I worked with online, they paid a lot of money to work with me. And that freaked me out because I didn't know what I was doing. And with all of that freaking out going on, right? There was this one company that was like the gold standard for me, where I one day wanted it to be. And these guys, they had a huge podcast. They were like all over social media. They were so well known. They had this super deluxe intensive bootcamp training on social skills in Hollywood that I was secretly saving up money for so I could one day go. And they got in touch and they said, hey Michael, we hear what you're doing. Would you like to work for us? Now at this point, luckily my mouth was quicker than my imposter, and I said yes. And then I freaked out, because now it was just a matter of time before I'm being found out, right? Now it's like the fraud police would be at my door, they would come in, they would like push me down, they would tell everyone in the world that I had no idea, I had to give all the money back. And I felt like I can't live like that anymore. Like I need to solve this. So I did something that I thought was really smart. And I got out my journal, and I was like sitting down, I was like, okay, I'm gonna figure out how I get over this, because I can't, with these feelings, these doubts, I can't live like that anymore. I need them to go away. Act coach in me, right? I need to go, make them go away. So I sat down and I found the solution. And the solution was that I had to be the most confident person on the planet. I needed to be an absolute pro at dating, like being on a different date, like every day of the year. I had to be so perfect in conversations that I never ever stumble or say anything weird. I had to be the demigod of parties, like the god of parties. That's what I had to be, and that's what I was writing down. And then I looked at that list, and at that point I worked with like hundreds, if not over 1,000 clients, and suddenly I realized I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person who's always confident, never stumbles, never has a heartbreak, never gets rejected, because I care about my clients so much, even though I'm an imposter and they don't know that I'm a fraud, but I really care about them. And I can't tell them to leave their comfort zone. And if I don't know what it's like, I can't help them to get over being rejected at a date if I don't know what it's like. And I can't tell them they know what to do when they're anxious, socially anxious, or when they've screwed up the conversation and made a fool out of them. If I'm never there, if I'm such a golden statue that I'm untouchable, how can I work with them? And that's when I decided that my imposter, like that I'm happy, that I'd rather be an imposter than perfect. And Viktor Frankl, this quote came back to me at that moment. Viktor Frankl wrote in The Doctor and the Soul, what is to give light must endure burning. And I connected with that. And I said, for my clients they're really great people. They struggle, they're in pain, they're lonely, and they're really trying hard. And I want to burn for them because that's worth it. That's the person I want to be. And from then on out, whenever I showed up and I was in a coaching session and I knew that I might not have the perfect answer or, the perfect research to quote or even the perfect internet connection, right? Whenever those doubts crept in, that's when I started wearing them like a badge of honor, because that badge of honor showed me that I was caring. And I would rather be the coach who doesn't have all the perfect answer but really cares of finding out than to be the coach who doesn't care about having all the perfect answers already. And I'd rather be that person who cares. And with all of that, like, whoa, light bulb moments and embracing the imposter, it's still such an annoying little thing that I just want to, throw it around the room every once in a while because it always creeps up. But where at the beginning it crept up as a, you're not good enough, it now creeps up as a, hey, just checking, just checking you still care. Just want to make sure you still care. And that is a nice way of looking at it. So I'm Michael, and I'm really proud of being an imposter.
Thank you, Michael. That was so great. I love that perspective on pain. And I mean, gosh, is there anything that Viktor Frankl said that wasn't just like pure beauty and wisdom? I haven't actually heard that quote before. I'm going to have to write it down and remember it because I think that is just so incredibly wise.
It is. So I was looking this up specifically, and it's not. So Viktor Frankl was quoting Anton Wilkins, who wrote this in German. And the thing is, in German, it is, was brennen soll, muss das Feuer erlauben. Well, the thing is, the German quote is like, you have to. But the English quote is like, you can choose to. So, that's the difference between German and English for you. But yeah, it wasn't Frankl, it was Wilkins who was quoted by Frankl.
I love that so much, and I think it puts a nice end to our conversation here because, people may come to a panel like this hoping that we're going to teach them how to cure their imposter syndrome, because don't we all deeply want to feel that confidence and not have this self-doubt? But really what we learn here is that this is all just part of being a human being. It's just part of the deal, and it's our common humanity. And there are some benefits in that it tells us this is where we're right where we need to be, as Janina often says, because it matters. And what you're talking about, Michael, is this ability for us to also have like true empathy for the people around us, knowing that they're struggling in similar ways. So thank you to our amazing panelists for being here and being vulnerable and authentic. I feel so moved and inspired, and so much gratitude for being part of this group. And so we'll wrap up here, and I think we now have about 10 to 15 minutes for question and discussion. Thank you.